Very excited to have Debbie Hamrick here. I first met Debbie when she was a member of our board of directors for the Arboretum. Debbie's has been around here and been part of the Arboretum for a long time. She was one of J.C. Ralston's students. We were talking about that. They're getting to be fewer of those that are around and still with the Arboretum. So we like to have Debbie here with that history with the Arboretum. Debbie works in public policy as the Director of Specialty Crops for North Carolina Farm Bureau Federation. And that is everything from nursery greenhouse crops, fruit and vegetables, aquaculture, fisheries, beekeeping, which she does at her home here in Raleigh, small-scale livestock, small farm communities, a little of everything. And the range of issues that she covers, everything from produce safety to pollinators, invasive plants, economic development, rural areas, really just a broad swath of knowledge. And it's amazing. I'm in a lot of meetings on campus, here with the Arboretum, with groups, and they'll be talking about, who do we need to talk to about this? Who do we need to get involved with this? And the first name that comes up almost with any group that I deal with that's part of the green industry is, we should get Debbie Hamrick involved, because what she does is really network people, get them together, get people talking to each other, and really get these conversations going to really transform what we think about as horticulture. When she's not doing all that, she has founded a website, newterrain.us, which is a business-to-business newsletter about green infrastructure and functional landscapes. She has organized 4 green infrastructure symposia meetings that have brought together people from all across the country, national speakers that have really the movers and shakers in this. Really, I don't know when she sleeps because there is a whole lot going on, and she has a fabulous garden as well. So please help me welcome Debbie.
Thank you, Mark. That was a great segue for me to talk about horticulture. So I do try to get people out of their box as much as I possibly can. I like them to think a little bit differently than they did when they walked in to whatever meeting it is or wherever we are. So I'm hopeful tonight that you guys, did the mic just, he just adjusted?
We lowered it.
Okay. So that you guys will begin to see the world a little bit differently. And I want to tell you why I've started to see the world this way. I have a horticulture degree from NC State University. As Mark mentioned, I'm one of J.C. Ralston's devotees. As a matter of fact, sitting in his classes when I was an undergraduate and seeing all the really cool overseas gardens gave me the itch to work internationally in horticulture, and I did. I founded a magazine called Floriculture International that's still being published today, and I've traveled all over the world seeing greenhouses and looking at flower production. So I've had this great career. When I started at Farm Bureau, and I had horticulture as one of the issues in my portfolio that I manage, stakeholders internally and externally, I began to see a topic, actually it was invasive plants, that's morphed into green infrastructure. A whole lot of issues behind the scenes, deep behind the scenes, and mounting evidence bases of what plants do in our world, especially in our managed urban landscapes. And horticulture is not a part of the discussions most of the time. So what I want to do with you guys tonight is to help you see a little bit of what I see and get excited about what plants do so that we can begin to help tell the world about the wonderful things of plants. Lights. So I'm going to give a little bit of an outline. Where are we now? A little bit about how I term green infrastructure, and then finally how I've incorporated some of these thinking and some of these ideas into what I do at my own home. So when I talk about green infrastructure, I'm mainly going to be talking about public spaces, and I'm mainly going to be talking about the evidence base that's being developed right now about landscapes, urban ecology, and it's being done primarily outside of the horticultural industry. I want you guys, you can't understand how important that is. We need to get the word horticulture in front of the public, and that's one of the things that I hope you will help me do when you leave tonight. So where are we now? If we look at where we are on the planet with our developed land, most of the land that's going to be developed by 2030 is yet to be developed. We're going to be taking another 1.2 million square kilometers by 2030. And you can see on this really cool visualization how much more land that is. There was a headline that came across my transom today, and transom for all the young people in here is a really old word for wire, and that's another really old word for a text. So there was an item that came across my transom today that said we're actually running out of resources. I don't know if anybody's noticed some of the headlines, like I monitor headlines for new terrain. Sand is in short supply. Sand is necessary for concrete. Sand is a natural resource. And look at where we're going from a development standpoint. So I want to challenge us that we need to be part of this discussion. What we do in horticulture is on developed land. That is us. That's plants with people. Where are we in terms of population? If you look at where we are going by 2025, up to almost 9 billion people on the planet. The UN projects that by 2100, we'll be at 11 billion people on the planet. Right now, we're around 7.4, 7.5 billion people. Most of those people are living in the world's cities. A lot of folks don't realize it, but in July 2007, we stopped being a rural world and we became an urban world. That's when more people were living in cities than living in the countryside. That trend isn't slowing down, not a bit. Plants with people is horticulture. That's what we are. You look at North Carolina, 60% of the growth in the state of North Carolina is migration of folks moving in from out of the state. Absolutely. If you look at Charlotte and Raleigh, here in Raleigh, we are bigger than Miami, Minneapolis, Cleveland, and New Orleans. Can y'all believe that? Little sleepy Andy Griffith town is bigger than Miami, Minneapolis. I mean, we didn't get Miami Vice. What are we going to do? What kind of TV show are we going to have in Raleigh? And Charlotte's bigger than Detroit, Seattle, Denver, and Boston. This is North Carolina, guys. We picked up another congressional representative because we're such a popular place for people to move. We're growing very rapidly. What does that mean? If you know Steve Troxler as well as I do, and we have somebody in here who's now an employee of Steve Troxler, the Commissioner of Agriculture, when he was new commissioner, he used to stand up and he used to talk about the hundreds of acres and the thousands of acres that we were losing on an annual basis to development. And the truth was, at that time, we lost about 100,000 acres a year. This is going back into like 2005, 2006. We hit the recession, which was a bit of a speed bump in development, but we're back up to where we were. So if you look at where we were in 2000, that's pretty developed, right? Look at where we're going in 2030. That ought to make every one of us gasp, because that is forest and undeveloped land that's being developed. We're pouring concrete, we're putting down asphalt, we're building hard surfaces and putting in roofs. People are moving in. At the height of development, it took about 2.5 acres of land for every person that moved here. Those acres of land were going to Walmarts and Kmarts and schools and roads and other infrastructure and homes, other infrastructure. That's a lot of land. That's where we got sprawl. In the early 2000s, we lost 383 acres a day. And you can see this is the kind of land. So we're taking down our nice trees, and this is what we do. We scrape every bit of living organic matter off of the lot. Every single molecule is gone. I question where the microbiome went. And then we develop it. And we're developing infill more and more and more. Does anybody in here live inside the Beltline like I do? Okay. Cowper, go on Cowper Road off of Fairview, between Fairview and Glenwood. This is right around the corner from my house. So a developer bought this little nondescript ranch home, which was Zillow's estimate at $559,000. I don't know exactly what he could have paid, $599, which had a lot. And he put this house and another house just as ugly next to it. And I don't know, I'm sorry, if you know the developers, probably a nice gentleman. just as ugly next to it. They're sitting, I like to say to everybody, within an inch of the setback line. There's nothing left, and they're both on the market for $1.4 million. So they went from $500 to $99,000 on this one lot, and this one lot that had large trees. The landscape is nondescript, right? But there's a lot of ecological functionality in what was there. And right now, there's zero ecological functionality in here. And I can tell you, as a neighbor that lives around the street, there's no way for these people that are going to live in these two homes to even have a chance of meeting the neighbors like the other houses are designed. We all have front porches. We all have driveways. We walk our dogs. We get to know each other fairly well. And these homes are almost set up to prohibit that kind of connectivity. And what we're doing all over the country when we do this infill is just this. So this is what we take out, and this is what we put in. So we're taking, and the horticulture industry, Mark, this is directly to you, is putting the same plants that we've always had since the 1950s here at this house, back in this house. Why aren't we thinking a little differently? We've got less space, we need to make more of an impact, we need to have more functionality, and we need to do it and rethink what we're doing, but we're not. We're just continuing to use the same plants over and over and over and over again. And I know JCRA is really good about introducing plants, but I think we really need to be thinking even broader than we currently are today. So this is when my daddy, who's now deceased, was 7 years old, 1940, what North Carolina looked like. We didn't have to think very much about how we developed our land at that point in time because we have plenty of land. As a matter of fact, a lot of people fly into North Carolina today and they think, that state's not developed at all. Look at all the trees. And every time I fly in, I'm like, holy cow, look at that spot that's just gotten taken away and this spot that's just gotten taken away. So it really is a matter of your vantage point. But this is where we're going. And my comment to you is, we can't do what we've always done expecting to get what we've always got off of our land. We have to think differently. We have to garden differently. We have to be different in our cities. We have to look at our cities from a different perspective with fresh eyes and with different eyes if we're going to have places that foster people. So what's green infrastructure? So green infrastructure, very, very, very broadly, is all of those spaces that provide ecological services back to society. So very broadly, it's our rivers and our streams and our waterways, our riparian buffers. And those riparian buffers, if you don't know that term, that's the area right along the waterways that provide a buffer area to take out pollutants, to provide habitat for wildlife right along our waterways. It's our low density residential that has a lot of plantings around it that allows water to infiltrate, provides wildlife habitat. It's all the green spaces in our cities. It's our parks. It's our urban forestry canopy. It's our farmland. It's our coastal wetlands. It's all these spaces that help our society deal with the natural flow of nature and provides ecological services not only for us, but for wildlife. That's a very broad definition of green infrastructure. So if you look at why we need it, urbanization. So far, we've developed about 133 million acres of land in the United States. So if you were to take all of the pavement alone covers the size of Georgia. Just asphalt and pavement covers the size of Georgia. All of the development covers Colorado, Michigan, Georgia, and Florida. That's a lot of land that we've developed. And if you look at why that's important, just in one ecological functionality area, and that's stormwater. And stormwater is the area that's getting the most traction right now for green infrastructure because it's less expensive than putting in gray or black infrastructure. So you're hearing a lot about green infrastructure as regards to stormwater. In my view, green infrastructure is whenever we use a vegetated plant system in a managed urban space to provide ecological or other functionality in that space. That's my definition of green infrastructure. But just looking at stormwater alone, so if you have a natural area like a forest, and you take a look at how much water that falls on that area actually is infiltrating into the ground and recharging the natural aquifer. I saw a study that if Los Angeles infiltrated all of the water that fell on that city, that they could provide 40% of their water needs. That's a lot. And all they're doing is managing the water they already get and using it wisely, being smart about what they do. So if you have an undeveloped state, you actually take about half of all the rainfall and you recharge your aquifer. So you're putting that water in the bank. I'm a gardener. I was very disappointed that Irma did not give me any rain this week. Anybody else in here disappointed?
Yes.
This chick spent $550 on plants and then busted her fanny all day on Sunday planting, waiting for Irma to do her thing, and it didn't happen. So anyway, the more development that you get, the less and less you're infiltrating. By the time you get into a 10 or 20% impervious surface in our cities, you're only getting about 15% of deep infiltration. So what's happening to all that water? It runs off. It runs off, and when it runs off, it carries all the pollutants with it. Whether or not it's the bird poop on your roof, or the transmission fluid that leaked out of your car on the asphalt, or the gasoline at the gas station that somebody spilled, and all of that goes where? Into our surface waters that then we drink, and we're taking some of it out, not maybe all of it, and then it goes down to the ocean, where it can harm wildlife in the ocean. It's not smart for us to be doing this. So the idea with looking at this kind of development and having so much impervious surface and green infrastructure is, gee, what if we did this different? What if we developed differently so that we actually took some of that stormwater that's running off, which is a natural resource? We know right now there are countries that are fighting over water. In our state, we get 40 to 60 inches of water a year. I always say, I used to be a business person, our water is a timing variance. We just don't always get it at the right time, right? But we get the water here. We just need to be squiring the resources that we actually get and not allowing it to run away from us. Green infrastructure to handle stormwater works. This was a study that was done in the UK. It's from Trees, People, and the Built Environment Proceedings. And in that study, they found just one tree reduced runoff 60% compared to the tarmac. That's their word for parking in the summer and winter. Just one tree. And if you look, the grass plots in the summer or winter, grass plot here in the summertime and the grass plot in the winter grass plot when the grass wasn't actively growing let a little bit of water run off, but in the summertime it didn't let any water run off. So turf, managed well, also infiltrates a lot of water and takes a lot of runoff. But when you scrape all the organic matter off and you leave compacted clay, and then you try to grow grass on that, you don't have any organic matter in the soils to allow for infiltration, for root infiltration, and you've got to put all kinds of fertilizers on it just to get the plants to grow because there's no natural fertility there for the plants, you get a lot of runoff. So we have to be thinking differently, and we can do this. It works. It actually works. So much so that large cities like New York, like Philadelphia, like Chicago, like Seattle, are putting big bucks in green stormwater infrastructure. As a matter of fact, New York is putting in 10,000 rain gardens, 10,000 rain gardens, and they've got them, the ones that they've already got installed are all mapped online. It's really, really, really cool. They want to take 10% of all of their runoff out of this system, because they know they're vulnerable. They're vulnerable in heavy rains. They're vulnerable in events like a Sandy. And the more water that they can infiltrate, and the more water they can handle where they live, the better off they're going to be able to protect this hard infrastructure. Water flooding in these buildings is not a good thing. We need to handle the water and not let it flood the buildings. So if you look at the managed urban landscape, the managed urban landscape is also green infrastructure. This is a stormwater facility by the Talley Center. This is a stormwater facility this is Talley Center on NC State campus over near Syme Hall. This is at Duke University. This is actually a green roof. And there's drains underneath here where water's running down and they're filtering it in. And this is Sierra Brewing out in, what was the name of that beer? Sierra Nevada out in Asheville, North Carolina. And they're handling all of their runoff. They've got cisterns that handle the roof runoff, and they've got permeable pavement, and for all extra water that's running off, they've got these bioswales in their parking lots to handle every single drop of water that runs off that pavement. They're capturing every drop of water at Sierra Nevada Brewing. But green infrastructure is more than rainwater management. It's important. Green infrastructure, rainwater management, called green stormwater infrastructure, is monetized. That's why it's getting so much attention. We have to pay money as a society to manage stormwater. And so we know green infrastructure works for stormwater management. It's called low impact development. I am happy to report to you, NC State University is a leader in low impact development worldwide. Dr. Bill Hunt in the College of Ag and Life Sciences, Biological and Ag Engineering Department, and others there lead this whole practice worldwide. But it's more green infrastructure when you look at it more broadly, like I define it, is more than stormwater. Stormwater is an important part, but it's more. As I said, pavement alone is more than 38 million acres. Pavement alone also causes more problems than stormwater runoff. This is a thermal map of a city street. And you can see how much hotter the hard surfaces are, the built surfaces, than the people and the vegetation. And that's a vine growing on a building there. So plants can cool cities. As a matter of fact, there's cities in the United States that are actually beginning to take a look at this. This is not monetized yet. It's brand new. It's a brand new way of thinking. But it takes an evidence base, and it takes people who are willing to step out on a ledge to begin to do the work to get people thinking along these ways. And the city of Louisville has actually put a plan together that talks about their heat island. They've identified areas within the city of Louisville where they can plant trees to reduce their temperatures, because they're the 5th hottest city, and they're 20 degrees hotter in the city than it is right outside of the city. They want to do something about it. They want to plant more trees. They want to plant 450,000 trees, as a matter of fact. A couple of months ago, the city of Dallas also released a study on their heat island with a plan to plant more trees. Now, just putting a plan out and a document doesn't mean anything. It's good, it gets a lot of PR, but it doesn't mean it's actually going to happen. The city of Louisville right now is in the middle of several battles to try and protect the trees that already exist in the city. And those are discussions that are happening right now in the city of Louisville. They're talking about which trees can we take down? Can we protect trees? If we're going to protect trees, how do we do that? Where do we plant trees? Which trees are okay to plant? These are the kinds of discussions that are beginning to happen in this country. This is horticulture. I don't know very many horticulturists, however, that are engaged in these discussions. This is where we are evangelicals about what we do. Plants rule. They rock. We know plants. Plants are cooler than asphalt. Lots cooler. Plants also reduce air pollution. Most of the work that's happening in the evidence base that's being developed for the air pollution studies is happening over in Europe, because they have a lot more densely populated city centers with that old market structure, and the roads are sort of convoluted to get down there. And they need to take particulate matter out to protect the health of the residents there. And if they put vegetation in the right spots, they can reduce the pollution in the city centers. Isn't that cool? We've got some recommendations now from the US EPA about highway construction on where to plant vegetation to help reduce pollution. There's a study that EPA just funded that's happening right now out in the California Bay Area, where they're planting trees and shrubs along a highway, and they're actually going to be taking a look at monitoring how much the pollution has decreased for an elementary school there. So they're trying to protect the kids there by planting plants. Plants rock, guys. We only think of them as pretty, but trust me, they're much, much, much more than pretty. Plants also build soil and infiltrate water. Did anybody else see this article that was in National Geographic a couple of years ago? This was just the coolest picture to me, because when I saw that article, I was like, man, my front yard underneath the soil surface must look totally cool. I wish I knew how deep those roots were. But when you look at these roots are transporting water all the way down into the ground, because the water can travel along the roots as it goes in. These roots are taking the nutrients out of the soil. They're sequestering carbon. This is like wow, you cannot erode this unless the water's moving really, 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 really fast. And I haven't heard any gardeners talk about soil structure. Now, I have a 1928 house, and my side garden, which is all my garden is dry shade, my side garden runs right over a 1928 tile sewer pipe. I'm extremely conscious about the root structure of the plants that I have planted there. And I only want fibrous plants to be on top of that sewer pipe. I don't want to have to dig up that sewer pipe. I don't want to excavate. I don't want to dig my garden up. But we need to be talking about this. Why aren't we talking about our fiber? I've got fibrous roots on this plant. I've got tap roots on this plant. This plant's going to do that. It's just as important as the top of the plant to talk about the roots. How long are those roots? He was, I think I heard he was 6 feet tall. So that's 9 feet.
So the roots in the picture are the same of the plants?
Of these?
Yeah.
That is a scale going down to 15 feet.
Oh my goodness.
And there's a whole bunch of native plant societies that have taken this, and you can get this online. If you speak or you talk to schools, you can get this visualization. They'll be happy for you to download it. We're learning more about plants. Plants sequester carbon dioxide. But here's a kicker. So these are all silver maple, sweet gum, southern magnolia, all different cities. We didn't realize that they don't sequester carbon dioxide at the same rates. We don't really know how to manipulate that. So we're beginning to get a look at what plants are going to do what. This is the kind of information that we need in order to better be able to model, so that when we look at trying to provide something to a city, like a carbon sequestration opportunity, we can talk with logic and reason about which plants should be picked for it. We know working trees. This was work that was done at the Morton Arboretum. They took a look at which trees, a range of trees, actually had the best transpiration performance in the bioswales. And Quercus macrocarpa was the winner. And this was the exact order with the best transpiration performance. To my knowledge, this had never been done before. This is brand new kind of research. It was done about 1.5 years ago. This is the kind of work we need to make horticulturists more relevant in these discussions, so that when we make recommendations, we know what we're talking about. Vegetation in general protects women's health. This is a study that was done up in Connecticut. It was done by Harvard. And what they found was that over 8 years, that women that lived in areas with more vegetation had a 12% lower mortality rate. They also saw no upper threshold at which the mortality began to change. So the more vegetation, the better. So we're all going to live forever because we're gardeners, right? That's my goal. Trees also make you feel wealthier. This was a study that was done up in Toronto. Having 10 more trees in your city block improves your health perception, as if you think, not real, but think you make $10,000 more, and you've moved to a neighborhood with a higher net worth. So by these definitions, we're all exceptionally wealthy and we're going to live forever, right?
Right.
But this is what people think when they're around vegetation. It's a totally different atmosphere and attitude when you're around vegetation. And vegetation reduces crime. This is work that's being done in the Midwest, because we're losing trees with emerald ash borer up there, and they are documenting that in the areas where they lose emerald ash borer, crime rates are rising, especially petty crime rates like theft. So trees decrease crime. Isn't that cool? So where are we going from here? We know we can't do everything we've always done the same way and get what we've always got. We've got to do things a little bit differently. So where are we going to go from here? So this is a study that's been done. The Cari Institute is behind this. And when I first saw it, I always make a joke about, never give me my lattes and then show me something controversial because it makes me upset. When I saw this, I just got really, really, really angry, because what they did was they set out to prove, and they did, that our gardens are more alike than they are different. And they did prove that. They proved without a shadow of the doubt that we are homogeneous in our managed urban landscapes across the United States. Our lawns, and then a number of the plants that we all like to plant. are consistently the same over and over and over again. So in essence, the idea that they were trying to propagate there is that we have turned ourselves into little McDonald's at home. The same landscape, the same style, the same values propagated over and over and over and over and over again. And their argument was that it didn't have to be that way, first of all, but that these yards were not giving a lot of ecological performance back to the environment. Yet we know, increasing evidence base again, that when we look at cities and we begin to take the bits and pieces of the evidence base and begin to model what we can do in cities, that it makes a lot of sense from a monetary standpoint, that we can improve the health of cities and we can provide ecological services in cities that have value back to society through carbon sequestration, through air pollution mitigation, through reducing stormwater, saving energy by shade, recreation, health effects, and other services. We know we can be beneficial in cities, yet we're not doing it in our own gardens. So this is what I'm calling the and strategy. I'm not saying anything negative about where we are now, but we can do better. We can do a lot better. So in the past, this is how JC taught me to think. Beauty, aesthetics. And I learned when I got to Ball Publishing and we started writing that all that creates better tax value, a sense of place, and happiness. Plants make us happy. Flowers make us happy. They're beautiful. We decorate with flowers. We make nice spaces with flowers. But there's more to the picture than just pretty. So I'm calling this side the Renaissance. It's taken after Rick Dark, I like better than Doug Tallamy for reasons that I can explain later. Their book. I'm calling this the Renaissance, and it's the functional side of the landscape. And as horticulturists, we've got to begin to pay more attention to this if we want to be relevant to the population as we begin to continue to develop our urban spaces. Looking at stormwater control, infiltrating the water, focusing on air quality, taking the particulate matter out of the environment, focusing on not planting trees that generate ozone in areas where that could be a problem, generating food sometimes, saving energy, and my favorite, wildlife benefit. And why is this important? This is just this is a focus group of one from the Emergent Facebook group. But I thought this was so prescient when I read this one comment. I think our generation is having to deal with a lot more people on the earth, and we're looking at how to make our space useful, whether it's for food or habitat or sustainability or whatever. And he was talking about why just gardening in the traditional sense was not good enough for the millennials and not good enough for him. And that just struck me because it summed up what I see and hear a lot when I talk, and I talk when there's a lot of millennials in the room. I want to tell you, the way I'm talking totally resonates with anybody that's in their 20s and early 30s. They get it. They know that we need to be changing up how we think about the world. And it's happening. It's happening all over the country. In Pasadena, in California, there was a lot of cities and towns that were paying the residents $3.50 per square foot to take the turf out and put in this. Now, I know we're all plant dweebs, okay? Which one's more attractive to us? I'm going there. This is challenging. It's prettier. It's just more appealing to me from a horticultural perspective. We got people gardening on balconies now. The people want to be around plants so much. Have you guys driven around downtown Raleigh and seen all these the new infill in Cameron Village and all, and seen all the plants that are on balconies? It's so cool. These kids love plants. They want to be with plants. They don't necessarily know everything about what they're doing, but they like plants. We got something to work with. Nigel Dunnett and James Hitchmow actually are two renowned designers. They design these managed plant communities that are partially introduced species and partially native species. James was one of the ones that did Olympic Park in London. that was very, very, very well received by the whole horticultural community all over England and London. This is the Ball Horticulture Company, my old employer. This is what Anna Ball has chosen to plant in front of the Ball Horticultural Company. Now, they're the ones that do the knockout roses and the wave petunias. And when they first put this landscape in, I think it's been about 5 years. Anna's comment in a meeting where I was actually staying with her was, this is what all the visitors wanted to know about. It wasn't the annuals, it was this. And this was designed, I think it was Roy Diblick, or I think it was Roy Diblick design. Los Angeles, growing food, now this doesn't pay, that's another conversation, but it's still nice, and this is still great infrastructure. In Singapore, again, this is probably very impractical, but it speaks to getting plants near to where people live. And you're seeing this kind of thing all over the world in some climate zones where they're actually doing these really cool designs, and they're putting plants up high and at the level of the residents. And we're seeing it here in North Carolina. I already showed you the beer headquarters, Sierra Nevada. This is Raleigh. This is the emergency management, new emergency management center right over by the Prairie Ridge. The Tally Center, Lowe's headquarters. I mean, to me, let's look at Lowe's headquarters for a minute. Does anybody find this ironic that this is the headquarters for Lowe's? I don't know that any of these plants are sold in the garden center. So, I mean, it's just irony to me that at their own headquarters, they created a space that's totally in tune with the natural environment there. As a matter of fact, they're recycling all their water. Yet, they propagate and sell our stuff, our normal horticultural stuff, at their garden centers over and over and over again. And so whenever I look at this and I'm like, it just seems to be a bit of a disconnect to me. I don't know if y'all see the irony. So, how am I incorporating this thinking at my level in my home? Because I've shown you a lot of public spaces, a lot of really big spaces, and I tried to take you to the 40,000 foot level that I monitor through my newsletter, New Terrain, and that is this evidence base that's based on science, on how we use plant material and managed urban spaces to provide ecological services back to society. So how am I trying to do this at my own home on 2310 Fairview Road? Come by. I don't weed, but you might help me water if you come by, and we can talk a lot. And I have beer, if you like beer. So this is my home, 1928 house. House is great, nothing special. I want to be clear about some things. So I think when we talk about wildlife habitat, a lot of times I hear people talk in the garden industry about wildlife habitat, and they really get engaged in the plant, and they get engaged in just the space of the garden, when we need to be looking up about wildlife habitat and going up to different levels. We need to look at the 10,000 foot level, we need to look at the 5,000 foot level, the 2,000 foot level. So I want to just sort of show you where I am. Raleigh's Hayes Barton neighborhood. It's an old white oak hickory remnant forest. My house is here, backs up to this. So it's loosely, the Cowper Road that I showed you is over here. That nasty development that's over here. And then Charlie and Sissy on the corner have a beautiful home, and they have about 5 or 6 white oaks that are just amazing and provide a really nice small urban forest. This is my house. So I am in my garden with wildlife manifesting this entire space. Trust me, it wasn't here before. It wasn't all here before. I'm manifesting and providing what I consider to be safe harbor in my space for all of this. And I'm not stupid, I know that. I'm surrounded by lawyers, and I garden on their property with some loose permission, so I do guerrilla gardening on all their land. And they're fine with that. And I put plants over there that I don't necessarily love, that I would, if they get cut down later, I won't cry, you know, but I have some cool stuff planted there too. So, I strive to keep the rain. I really strive to keep the rain. My garden is undertaken with the cooperation, or lack thereof, this week, of 5 Quercus alba trees that have been at that space for longer than the house. I don't need to tell anybody in here who's ever dealt with dry shade what dry shade gardening is all about. I can tell you, if you want to save some time on plants that are going to just be eaten, we could compare notes, just sort of give up and move on to something else with dry shade. But I'm under dry shade. But I want every drop of rain that falls on my property as much as possible. When you look at a tree, and we're beginning to document this really well, there was a pretty cool article that came out last year in Stormwater Management magazine by a forester and an engineer, about what we do know about how trees intercept water. So when it rains, a tree will actually take that water and intercept it in a number of different ways. Stem flow is very important. So the water will actually run down the stem and into the roots and filter all the way down. I never thought about that before. But now that I've seen these kinds of things, I go out in the rain, I watch this stuff in my garden. It's pretty cool to see the water, the rivulets coming down the bark of a Quercus that's 125 years old. That's a neat thing. It's sort of zen too. If you're gonna get wet, you may as well enjoy something. The foliage also intercepts water. The foliage can intercept up to a 1/4 inch of water, depending on how thick it is. One tree. Now if you put layers in your garden, like I have, so you have the canopy tree, and this is something we don't talk about in horticulture much, we just talk about trees. Canopy trees, guys, understory trees, shrubs, subshrubs. We got to start thinking a little bit differently about how we think in vertical terms. Canopy trees provide a tremendous amount of ecological service to society. And a canopy tree is a tall tree. My white oaks are 5 stories high. I love them and I hate them, but mainly I love them. Mainly I love them.
What they hate them? Too much shade?
When I first moved in, like every horticulturist, I had the tree that was closest to the house targeted for removal, and my husband convinced me that I shouldn't do that. And then I had a forester friend over, and I asked her, I said, is this tree bothering this house? And she looked at me and she said, Debbie, let's think, how old is this tree? Over 100 years old. How old is the house? 1928. Do you think the house would have already been damaged? Duh, of course. So it's like, now I'm sort of copacetic with it, and it has the nicest structure of all the 5, and it provides immediate habitat. It's protected, and I've gotten to know my birds, and so I love that tree now, and I have no desire to take it out. And I'm glad my husband truncated my initial knee-jerk to try and take that tree out. But yeah, I wanted light. I don't have any light. I can't do a lot of stuff. I mean, you saw my front yard. There's, so over here, there's 3 white oaks. So this is my front yard. 3 white oaks here. And my neighbor here planted a nondescript maple that's growing at the speed of about 25 feet per year. And he's shading me out on this side. So I have moments of full sun right here. Right here. And it's allocated by the square foot. And so this year, okay, so I'm like you guys. I'm a plant dweeb. Plants come and go. Plants never should just stay forever, except for the big canopy trees. So this year, I'm planting buddleia off there. Now, my native plant friends would get really ticked off with me, but I've got a couple of big buddleias because I'm like, I got a little bit of a dearth of nectar and pollen plants here at the end of the summer. And I do have some sun up there, and they do pretty good. And it's sort of a jungle there. I don't really want to go in, and they don't need that much water, so I put 2 big buddleias right there. So we'll see what it looks like next year. I may rip them out. Who knows? We do that. We're horticulturists, right? So I want to keep the rain. So I disconnect my downspout. I live in Hayes Barton. This is the normal thing that people in Hayes Barton do, is they take the water that's coming off of their house and they pipe it to the street, and then this is what happens. And then they have an irrigation system. The irrigation system runs 3 to 4 days a week. It does not, so statistically, when you look at any study about irrigating turf or a landscape, you should irrigate deep. If you're going to water a couple of inches. Don't water a 1/4 inch. Water a couple of inches and do it infrequently. Help the roots penetrate the soil and go all the way down. But that's not what happens. But I've got all my downspouts are disconnected. This is the downspout that's off of my neighbor's garage, as is this one. And I have the flow coming off of these two hard surfaces is really a lot. So this slows it down, but I've got some more work to do here to try and really slow it down and get it to infiltrate more. I'm actually going to have to excavate and make a dry well. Has anybody in here heard of a dry well? Okay, so I'm going to put a dry well in, a couple of dry wells, to try and get that water to go in and penetrate down. Because I like the water, I want the water. I don't want it to leave my property. I garden in dry shade. I want that water. It's great. I just have to figure out how to capture it. So I want the water. That's the first thing. Keep all of my water. And I told Kevin Boyer, who is the head of the stormwater outreach for the city of Raleigh, I said, put a rain garden in front of my house. And he would. I said, I'll plant it, I'll maintain it, but I'm at the top of the hill, so it won't do any good. If I was down the hill a bit, he'd be and do a demonstration. I said, do a demonstration. Let's see which plants are going to work the best. Let's make it look good. I've also embraced natives. I have a problem with Doug Tallamy, and I want to tell you why. I like him in that he's gotten a conversation, a lot like Michael Pollan. I have a lot of problems with Michael Pollan because I work in food. And I have problems with Doug Tallamy. I have problems with Doug Tallamy because he's thrown this industry under the bus. He has just broad brushed the ornamental horticulture industry as being bad and evil. And I don't think that. I know better. I have a degree in horticulture. I worked in the industry my entire life, except for the past couple of years in policy. And I know better. The green industry was green before Doug Tallamy ever began to think of writing the book, Bringing Nature Home. And so for him to throw the industry under the bus, I have a big problem with. But I'm not, and I do not have problems with his message. His messages are correct. And he is getting more and more and more current documentation and evidence to support his major thesis, and that is that native plants evolved with the species that live in that area are better for those species. And that evidence base is rising. But I want to tell you, when he published this book, the citations in there were old. Did anybody else look at that but me? You look at the source documents? That made me angry. It's like, how can you say this? Well, what they're not talking about is climate change, guys. Everyone in here, we can start talking in our own garden what we're seeing and how our gardens are changing with climate change. And my garden is about bugs. I better get to that one. I'll get there in a minute and I'll tell that story. So here's native plants, and this is, you can quote me on this. Native plants are to the American ornamental horticulture industry what local foods is to the American agriculture industry. And I can tell you there's a tremendous surge in interest in native plants right now. If you were to add up all the dollars that are being used to promote native plants deep behind the scenes in regulatory circles and by cities and towns and all kinds of public information sources, millions and millions and millions of dollars are going to promoting native plants. The native plant growers that I know that are doing the best are selling native plants to stormwater, or they're targeting pollinator species. Native plants alone don't float any nursery's boat by themselves for the most part. There are a couple of guys that are focused only on native plants with specialties, and they're doing very, very, very well. But most of the time, the native plant nurseries that are exclusively native plants are not necessarily as healthy as some of the nurserymen that I know that have a mix of plants and do a responsible mix of plants. And I don't embrace natives exclusively. I am one of you. So I love natives, and I'm extremely conscious of where I'm planting my natives and my introduced species. I've taken an oath like a doctor would, and I want everybody in this room to take an oath to do no harm. And what does this mean? So I try to use my plant knowledge wisely, and I try to think about what am I planting, where am I planting it, and why am I planting it there? And honestly, okay, so I garden in dry shade. I have killed at least $1,000 worth of Tony Avent plants. Yeah, so that's a hard one, you know. I had a morgue at one time, you know, I saved all my tags, and I called it the morgue. And I was just saving them, and it got to be so much, and I was like, it's made me feel so bad, so I just throw them away, because I don't want to know how many tags are in the morgue. But I've killed a bunch of plants. I try not to allow native or invasives to take root. I'm watching right now some hellebores that seed vigorously. It makes me just batty to see all those little hellebore babies. Because what's that going to do in the woods? What's that going to do in the woods? That is, when these things escape from gardens, it's a black eye to the industry. And it marginalizes the industry in stakeholder discussions behind the scenes when we need to be represented well. I have a very difficult time talking and defending you when that kind of stuff happens. That is not a lie. I'm in those discussions. I do new terrain, I have street cred, but it's really hard to defend a purposeful invasive plant. I can't overstate that enough, guys. If you see a plant that's starting to be a problem in your garden, oh, please God, pull it out. Kill it. Use some Roundup. I had a clumping bamboo, and it was clumping all right at 1.5 feet and then 2 feet every 6 months. And I'm like, wow, it wasn't running, but it was clumping. And I just like, you know, this is, I can't control it. In dry shade. And I was like, well, you're growing. So I replaced that with a native spurge. If anybody wants the native spurge, it's equally as aggressive, but I think I can keep it under control more. So I try to correct my mistakes. But I want to tell you, my oath of do no harm doesn't just stop at the invasive side of what we can do. It also goes to birds. How many people in here realize that Nandina domestica berries contain cyanide? No. They contain cyanide. It's been proven. This is a scientific article. There's a couple of them. This one was released in 2010. And every year, there's reports in the wintertime of flocks of cedar waxwings that are hungry, that go to red berries, that die because Nandina domestica has cyanide. So when we do things like this, we're not helping green infrastructure. We're not benefiting the environment. We're actually harming the very things that a lot of us are trying to preserve and help. So I would encourage you, if you know anybody with Nandina domestica that actually has berries, and I have some Nandinas in my garden. They don't berry. I have Nandinas, that little heavenly one, that little wispy one that still looks like crap, even though I've had it for 5 years. Anybody else complain about it? Yeah, San Gabriel. I mean, I love it, but it's sort of like, can we have some more there? But anyway, it doesn't make berries. If you know anybody with this plant, would you please go and dig it out for them? Because we have flocks of cedar waxwings that come through all the time in Raleigh. And they're the Batman in formal dress. I call them Batman in formal dress because it looks like they're wearing tuxedos. I also keep my pets leashed. I have dogs. I would not allow cats to go out. If you live in the city of Raleigh, in the city of limits, the city will come out and trap cats for you. And when you catch a cat, they will take that cat to the shelter, and the owner can go and retrieve that cat for a fee. The second time it happens, I think it's something like $250. So if you've got cats that run around in your garden, I would encourage you not to allow that. We know they kill a ton of birds. And remember all those things that I showed you, how much land we're taking away? Every time we take a plot of land away for concrete, the birds have less and less and less and less land to live on. And we lose population. And then when we let our cats out to eat the birds, we're further harming them. The other thing is a cat doesn't care if the bird's rare or not. If it wants to eat my house benches, go for it. But it's not eating the house benches. It's taking my bluebirds. It's taking my goldfinches. It's taking my towhees. That's not allowed. I personally, and you can tell my neighbors this, 3 cats have gone to the shelter because of me. And I will continue to do that. I do not want your cats, it is illegal in the city of Raleigh to allow your cat to run around loose. That is not allowed. They also have toxoplasma. Toxoplasma can harm the fetus of an unborn child. It's in their fecal matter, and it's there. It's ubiquitous in the environment when the cat's around. So you're also doing a disservice to any woman who is of childbearing years when you have cats outside. I try to foster diversity, not cats. but especially bugs. Especially bugs. As a matter of fact, my whole garden, as Alice Hedman from Apiopolis knows, Apiopolis has helped Raleigh get its bee city designation. My whole garden is about bugs. Specifically, it's about bumblebees. I love bumblebees. I love my native insect species. And so I really try to look at and see how can I plant plants? How can I do things in my garden so that I manifest bees? The challenge for me in dry shade, honestly, is having pollinators in the shade that have nectar sources. But I've done it. And I've mainly done that with a lot of introduced species. Right now, it's Heptacodium myconoides. My coleuses, I found a couple of coleuses this year. I let them flower. The bees love them. I have hostas that begin to flower in late May and I have late hostas that are still flowering. The bees like the hostas too. So I try to think about what I've got out in the garden all the time that's going to provide food for my bees and my birds. And I try to think, like I showed you before, in terms of what am I harboring when? Our neighborhood red-tailed hawk hangs regularly in the pignut hickory, which is an understory tree in my backyard, because I have tasty squirrels that eat all kinds of acorns, and the fig tree is just for them. And the tomatoes are just for them. So it's tasty meat. And I also talked to my neighbors about biodiversity. This study just came out from Whistler. It was just published recently. And what they found at Whistler, they did a test. It was randomized, looking at natives, what they called near natives. A near native was from the northern hemisphere, and introduced species from the southern hemisphere. They found that natives were, number one, the best plant for pollinators. The near natives were second best, and the introduced species were much, much less important for those native pollinators. But here's what they really found, and this is where my garden really excels. They want the more dense canopy that you have, the more diversity they found in the space. So you want that canopy, you want that density, you want the diversity of species. I also love to feed the dirt. I put out 8 cubic yards of compost this year. I love feeding the dirt. I also have introduced worm species. I'm torn about that. They bring my compost down into the soil, but I'm growing lightning bugs. Does anybody in here know that lightning bugs spend most of their life in the soil? They spend most of their life in the soil. When they emerge, they're emerging only to mate. Most of the rest of their life is in the soil. And what do they do there? They eat detritus. Feed the soil. You will boost your lightning bug populations. I have the Firefly Lounge. And I can sit. I don't drink anymore, but I used to sit in the Firefly Lounge and enjoy a beer watching the fireflies come up from June till about early August. So feed the soil. The soil is extremely important. I don't need to tell you guys this, but as gardeners and horticulturists, we don't talk enough about the soil. Feed the soil. We have an amazing compost industry in the state of North Carolina that's dedicated to sustainability. And we have some fabulous suppliers right here in Raleigh if you want to buy compost like I did. I also garden up. I look up a lot. And I think in terms of layers. I'm not a carpenter. I'm not a builder. I'm not an engineer. And my maintenance guys that come to the house get upset when they see my Dutchman's pipe doing that. I, on the other hand, hope to get enough critical mass to get enough swallowtails to come and begin to eat my Dutchman's pipe. But I also have passiflora over here. And this happened to be protected enough that I had passiflora incarnata that overwintered. So I've had nonstop flowering of passiflora incarnata for, golly, months and months and months. Now it hasn't made any fruit, or if it has, the critters have gotten it before I've gotten it. But I think in terms of layers a lot. All of this is pots. I have 70 large, it's on my driveway, I have 70 large pots on my driveway. If you're gonna do pots, you need, y'all know this, you need soil. You need to have big volume. I only use media. I use real media. I use real greenhouse media. I only buy it from Fairview Greenhouses because they have the old Fafford 3B mix. Fafford's gone now, but they have that still. That's the only thing that I will garden in my pots because I want the good stuff. I'm a horticulturist, I'm like you guys. I'm a gardener. I want my plants to do well. But I have 70 pots, and they support an amazing amount of bees and birds. The birds love my pots too. And I think in terms of layers. So this is just a view from the side garden. On the other side is a house where a really nice lawyer, a litigator lives. And I've created this thicket along the border of our house. And just in this kind of view right here, this is the list of species that I have. Quercus alba, Cornus florida, Magnolium epiphylla, Thuya occidentalis, Physocarpus diablo, Cephalataxis, Scratigus, Cercis chinensis. That Don Agoff is like a really spectacular plant, by the way. I got it at the JCRA plant sale, and I got this Edgeworthia at the plant sale. So if you've never done that, you know, these are good plants. Both very drought tolerant. Carex, lots of Carex, all kinds of different species of Carex. Anemones, Eurybia, Hosta, hellebores, Liripe, and the black mondo grass. I can never say Ogon correctly. But this is towhee heaven. I actually had baby towhees this year here. I mean, that's like the highest. To have a bird breed in your garden is the highest honor that can be paid. I mean, you know, they're like, these are like $5,000 fledglings, because that's about the cost it costs per bird. I have a $10,000 baby hummingbird this year. So, but I had a baby hummingbird. Isn't that cool? So, but you know, when you do this, and I'm not stupid. I'm manifesting my neighborhood. I'm manifesting my neighborhood, and I'm providing a safe haven on my property for my neighborhood. I'm also loose in my garden. I don't have any turf. There's not a lot of space. I cut back my perennial. It really depends on when I cut back, what I cut back, based on my time. I take up my leaves because I have 5 white oaks. White oak leaf takes 5 years to degrade. I have to take them away. I can't live with that. That's too much. So I bring compost in. Although if I had a big space, I probably would compost them myself. This is Edgeworthia. Edgeworthia for me is extremely important early pollinator source. I have a lot of bees. If you've never stood and watched bees in March, bumblebees, bumblebee queens that emerge are hungry. And when they're hungry, they're angry. And when they find a food source like this and another queen comes up, they fight. And these are big bees. These queens are big. They're really big. The colony throws the best to overwinter, and they ram each other, man. It's so fun to watch. I mean, you could set a chair up by the Edgeworthia and be entertained for at least an hour looking at all this cool stuff. So this Edgeworthia is surrounded by native plants. But like I said, I'm not a dedicated only natives. If a plant is good for wildlife and it's not invasive, I am not going to disturb it. I'm going to leave it there. And this Edgeworthia lives within 6 feet of a Quercus alba. I'm not going to lie, I do give it a shot of water every now and then, but it's doing fine in dry shade. And finally, to proselytize and tell all the good things about horticulture, I'm engaged with the National Initiative for Consumer Horticulture. We put out this great infographic titled Plants Do That. And it has a bunch of really cool research about the evidence base of the benefits of plants. Take it, share it, it's online. The web address is on the handout. Use it, promote plants, talk about it. It's not copyrighted. We want people to take it and share it and post it and do whatever you want to do with it. Because the idea is the more people we have who understand the benefits of plants and the beauty of plants and the necessity of plants for the cities of the future, the better we're going to be. Because the millennials already know this. And when we look at movements that they support moving forward, the environmental movement is one that gets a lot of support across political lines in the millennial cohort. I think that this whole idea of beginning to look at gardening and beginning to look at our managed landscapes as green infrastructure is only going to gain more and more traction over time as the next generations begin to come up. That's my contact information, newterrain.us. There's a sign up for it there, or you can just give me your email here and I'll get you added if you want to get the newsletter. And I have a big time at 2310 Fairview Road. Come by and see me if you're ever over in the Hayes-Barton neighborhood, especially if you see me outside. I don't look like much when I'm gardening, but y'all are used to that, like all of us. Thanks.
Thank you.
there any questions for Debbie?
Climate change, global warming, you kind of alluded to some of the research. Has anybody looked at trees, landscape as a way of controlling that?
I think the closest is coming. So there was a really cool report that came out in Chicagoland, and it's in New Terrain about 2 months ago, about how the species mix is going to change in the Chicagoland area based on climate change that we know is happening there and has been documented. Which trees are going to thrive, which trees are going to fall away. And the only 2 towns that I know of are that Louisville report and that Dallas report. They were done by the same gentleman in northern Georgia in the Atlanta area. I don't know if he's affiliated with the university or with a consultancy, but there is that approach of documenting the heat island, assessing it first, having the assessment, and then secondly, looking at the lay of the land and targeting areas where trees would do the most good, biggest bang for the buck, for lack of a better term. The issue is, and I spoke to the green infrastructure class that is also, it's happening at NC State University, also on Thursday nights, about 3 weeks ago. So if you want to plant a tree, it's really complex to do in cities. It's not easy. You got a lot of jurisdictional sandboxes. Is the city, who owns the street? Is it private, city, county, state? Is it federal? Big deal. What's underneath? What kind of root structure? You know, we don't talk a lot in horticulture about what the roots are doing, but that's a big deal for the cities. Coordinating all of that is really important. And then every city is organized a bit differently, how they do things. And so you can walk into a city with an idea that there's going to be a large stakeholder group and moving an idea like green infrastructure forward, and thinking about how do we use plant material to mitigate this heat island effect. But you have to first get an assessment, and then secondly, assemble a stakeholder group. Thirdly, get some protections for the plants that are already in place, being not too prescriptive so that you don't alienate everyone. This is not easy. What I'm talking about, looking at the world with these green infrastructure eyes, it's not going to be easy. That house that I showed you on Cowper, he took down some beautiful trees. You know, and it would have been much easier for us to save the trees that were there through some kind of incentive program to keep that ecological service going for everyone. Because the trees that are being replaced, it's the low stuff. I mean, it was not even, it's a $1.4 million home, and it's the contractor's choice, lowest quality plants that you could possibly think that are going. I mean, designer here, y'all know that. So it's like we're taking away functionality and we're putting back in, and this is where Doug Talmy, I'm not going to say he's right, but he's making a point when he throws us under the bus. And he's saying industry is causing all of this. Well, I know better, but you know, in that couple of instances, yeah, he's right.
You said trees cause ozone.
Yes, some trees cause ozone.
Which ones are the ones that we should avoid?
There is a great reference, University of California, Davis. If you Google University of California, Davis, ozone, trees, it'll come up. They have a list. They got a publication. Pine trees. Styrifla. Crap. What is the name of it? The native with the little gumballs, the gumball trees.
Oh, sweet gum?
Sweet gum, thank you. Liquid amber. Okay. Liquid amber causes ozone. There's a number of trees that will release ozone. And they only release ozone when the climate's bad. But what we have, the situation when we get ozone buildup in our environment happens at very high temperatures. And trees can mitigate that temperature rise. So ideally, we wouldn't get ozone in an area that's heavily vegetated. But when you're looking at, for example, a highway situation, shouldn't put trees that generate ozone near schools, near highways, near people that might be sensitive, like my husband who has a lot of lung issues, to ozone. And so we know, I don't think that list is complete. I think that we know some trees, and we don't necessarily know every plant that might generate ozone.
I thought every tree was good for eating oxygen.
Well, yes, they do, but not all the time. So, you know, plants are different. Plants are amazing. Plants do all kinds of cool stuff, but they're not all equal. That's why I think, you know, being a little more cognizant about what we're planting, when, why, and having a rationale is not a bad thing.
So you have a list of things we should avoid?
Plants we should avoid? The only one on that list right now is Nandina domestica. Because, yeah, and keeping your cats indoors. Those would be the two big things. Physostegia? Physostegia is a great pollinator plant. And actually, it's not hard to pull out. I pulled it out of my garden because it was a little too aggressive for me, but yeah, I didn't have any problems pulling it out. And the last patch that wouldn't succumb to my pulling, got some cardboard and it died right away.
How do you convince cities to not do the whole tree versus telephone wire thing where they cut just the center part out of the tree so the wire can go through? Or just spray this massive amounts of Roundup under all the wires so you have these big swaths of dead poison pines? I mean, how do we influence that so that can't happen? It breaks my heart when I see those poor trees cut.
So
Sure.
there is actually an annual meeting of those guys that's coming up in the next couple of months. And I saw that float by I have a big net for new terrain. I saw that come out of my net and I was like, man, I'd love to go to that meeting. Just to be a fly on the wall. I spoke, and I can't answer that question because it's individual, it's situational, it's all done on contract, the contracts change. But I would like to go to that meeting and understand it better. But I can tell you one thing that I did last year. I spoke to the Vegetation Control Association of North Carolina. That's the guys that do all the vegetation control under the, I call them troglodytes, the big high tension electrical wires. And I left much more impressed than when I walked in. Because I talked to them about why they need to be doing things a little differently and thinking a little differently. And a lot of them are thinking differently. And they've got some management techniques now where they are doing very selective herbicide treatments just to get rid of some target species, and they're manifesting the other early successional species that are really good for pollinators. And if you look at that, like I've been in some Farm Bureau, I have the opportunity to work on some really cool stuff. My portfolio is big, and I've been in some emergency management kinds of things. And seeing the maps of the transmission lines across the state, because that's critical infrastructure for us to protect as a state. And I'm like, and my thought immediately was like, bees, man, we got a whole bunch of bee habitat here. This is cool. And they are thinking along those lines. Making a phone call to Duke Power would be a good start.
I'm from California, and in California, the land is so scarce. Most of that land is used by people that create nurseries, and they just have a lot of plants on them, so at least.
Yeah, we used to call those power line growers
Yeah.
when I was in the magazine. Dave Sasuga was one of the biggest growers in the country eventually, and he started out as a power line grower.
Well, I think that when you have big trees growing next to power lines, I think it was not too long ago they had a major outage across a large region because a tree fell on a branch fell on a power line, so that they're doing more maintenance than they were before by law, because we all complain when our power goes out for whole cities and regions. So part of it is not planting things right next to power lines.
Planting the right species there
But
that
I know,
doesn't interfere.
Carolina Power and Light, when they were Carolina Power and Light, did have biologists and all who were doing work, and they were coordinating with some of the native plants people with savannas and things like that to try and encourage some of the rare species that were growing in the power lines, things that grow there that don't grow elsewhere because it's open. And so, I mean, there definitely is an interest there. It's also probably a question of money too.
Advocating for trees is one thing we can do. A lot of people are scared about trees, and I don't know about you guys, but I drive around the state a lot, all over the state, and I see tremendously poor pruning, really bad pruning.
Planting.
And bad planting. The pruning, though, kills me. When I see a tree that might be 50 or 60 years old and then it just gets chopped off at the top. Yes, sir?
I had a bunch of large, tall pines taken out of my yard. The hardwoods are starting to fill in. I was just curious as how guilty I should feel about doing that.
How guilty do you want to feel? Do you want me to make you feel good, or do you want me to make you feel?
I
A little guilty.
Because a lot of more different things are growing places.
Okay, so you're manifesting a different habitat.
Yeah.
The brown-headed
Yeah.
nuthatches went to another location. They're a threatened species. It's fine. They're hardy. They will breed anywhere. They used one of my nest boxes one year, so they just need one tree. Your neighbors. Your neighbors. But I mean, it's pretty cool. Like, I've started thinking about some of the rainwater thing and the dry shade. How much of my rain can I keep? So I have one spot in my garden where there's so much vegetation layers, even with 2 inches, and never made it down to that poor Vinca maculata that's growing on the grass. Like, it's just shriveling up. And I'm like, should I water it? You know, nope, not gonna. Because it made it through, it didn't make it through the quercus, the calycanthus, the viburnum, then the liriope. It didn't make it. It just totally, everything's intercepted. And so I'm like, oh, so maybe it'll come back next year. I'm a plant tweak though. That's an opportunity to put in dry shade species of Carex. Maybe. Is it going to be another spot that can be planted? Maybe with something that I want to water. Yes, ma'am?
How difficult is it to educate all of these developers to come in and do their number on? Is it impossible? Do they care?
There's people that are really smart that can talk about the line between voluntary versus mandated change. My observation in my role at Farm Bureau is that voluntary change happens really slowly and not well. It has to become mandatory. And so, you know, here's what we don't want to do. We need jobs. We want a healthy economy. We don't want to have something be so prescriptive that you take away the creativity of the entrepreneur. You want to allow for that to happen. At the same time, you want to have a regulatory scheme that does offer a vision for where things should be going. Now, whether or not we have that at this point in time, I can't say. But I can tell you that if we can do things, this is like why it pissed me off, I'm recording now, but don't tell me.
I can bleep it out.
Threw this industry under the bus. I know this industry. We can grow a lot of plants. So if this industry becomes engaged in making wildlife habitat and in looking at the world differently, it's going to happen a lot faster. If we can get a handful of developers engaged in that. And there are, Sierra Nevada really over-invested in their property in Asheville because they wanted to, with their value set of their company. Not everybody's there. A lot of folks are just trying to make a living. Maybe they're not very good businessmen or women. And does the market demand it? You know, the millennials, it's not clear if the millennials are actually going to be buying the same homes that the baby boomers did. That's sort of an outstanding question right now. There's a lot of people in the horticulture industry that are scratching their heads right now about what's that going to look like. This state is on the increasing side of population growth because we're such a great place to come and live. And so our industry is growing and our builders are growing, but that's not happening all over the country. For every person that moves here, a lot of times they left the Midwest or they left the Northeast. And that's abandoned infrastructure there. So that what you ask is consumer demand, the demand of the person or the individual or the company that's asking for that product. Because you can find a developer that will do it. They do exist. And then that line between the mandatory versus the voluntary, that's a difficult line. I will tell you, nobody wore seat belts before it was mandatory. I can tell you that, except for Debbie Hamrick, because I had an internship for Monsanto. I pimped Roundup herbicide when I was a junior in college. And if we were caught driving the company car without the seatbelt, we were fired on the spot. I put my seatbelt on every time. And I got in the habit of using a seatbelt, and that was voluntary, but I was going to get fired, so there was sort of a rule there. But the rest of the public didn't do that until it was mandatory.
I think, you know, when I visited your garden, and everybody should go, you said to me, you know, at the city level, to get them with the influx of people coming in, and we know that development is just going to increase, that the city if we can get the city to recognize the value of those green spaces and the existing vegetation, so, and you said it earlier, to incentivize that remains.
My
So-
dream would be that, you know, I would say that I would be paid to keep water on my property. That it could be monitored somehow. I would be paid to keep my 100-plus-year-old white oaks because they are sequestering so much carbon. The truth about the matter of trees is they reach a point in time when the carbon sort of sunk, and my trees are no longer sequestering as much carbon as the storadias that are now growing underneath them are sequestering more carbon because they're more rapidly growing. But so the ecological services changes over time, but a dream would be to pay for this. I didn't show you all the slides I have. I have hundreds of slides. I could talk about this stuff ad nauseum. So there was a study that was done in Amsterdam, and this is where I really get ticked off about the industry is not at the table, and horticulture is the solution because we are plants and cities. So they did this study, University of Amsterdam, the city of Rotterdam. It was a model, and they took information that we sort of know about how landscapes work, and they went into Rotterdam and they sort of modeled all these different areas in Rotterdam. Well, when they got to looking at gardens, the parks had a positive net ecological services impact. The urban gardening, which they call urban agriculture, which is really horticulture, that's still to be started, that had a positive ecological impact. But our gardens did not. Our gardens were downgraded. I did not dig deep enough into all of the citations to know if they actually had, if that was a preconceived notion, that they just thought the gardens were using pesticides and being highly maintained and a lot of fossil fuels, or if there was actually a literature and an evidence base underneath there to support that. But when I looked at their resulting idea of what it would look like to model what Rotterdam looked like, gardens did not matter. And I know differently. I know differently. So a dream would be for this industry to be so important to people that they'd say, we want your garden because your garden is providing all of this back to society. We're not there yet. We're not there. And one of the things that I do behind the scenes when I get a chance to, and I work about this much on green infrastructure. Mike Gray asked me if Farm Bureau is working on this. I work about this much on green infrastructure at Farm Bureau. But when I get a chance to assert the vegetated side of the industry, you better believe I do. I did to somebody that works at the White House just this week and asked him about, hey, this infrastructure spending you guys are doing, what about this? It's been proven to work. It saves money. Have you thought about it? And they hadn't. I think I'll email him.
This will be the last question, then we can continue at newterrain.us. You can be part of the conversation there.
When you're at the table with people from different backgrounds, what's your opinion of the training of some of the younger, newer landscape architects, urban foresters, and horticulturists? Do you feel like everybody's in a little silo, and do they have a horticulture background if they're a landscape architect, or are they just...
So do people like to stay in their silos? So I'm going to be totally transparent. This is probably too much information. My horoscope said I should not divulge too much information. This is sort of like personal. So it hasn't been until recently that I realized that I had a lot of silos that I've stayed in for most of my adult life. And so now when I sit at those kinds of tables, and because I'm working on new terrain and I see the engineering side, the landscape and design side, the plant side, the science side, the ecology side, everybody has their frame. That's why I use frames for my transition, because everybody has the frame of what they're looking at and looking for. And so when you sit down at those tables, they're not all going to be using the same language. They might be talking about the same thing. So, for a stormwater engineer, they're talking about low impact development. We're talking about horticulture and rain gardens. They're talking about low impact development. So what I try to do is surmise, where's that individual coming from? What's important to them? And then put something into terms that might get their interest and get them to stop and think for a moment about something. Does that make sense? But people do not, there's this thing called plant blindness. Have y'all heard of plant blindness? There's a thing called plant blindness. And we've got it in Raleigh everywhere. Our whole surroundings are changing at a very rapid clip, and people don't seem to be noticing it because they think, oh, that's just a tree. There's plenty more trees. Well, we're losing a lot of trees in North Carolina. And I'm not a tree hugger. You know? I appreciate them for what they do for us and for what they're doing for wildlife.
All right.
Very good.